Welcome, everybody, to the work session for May 25th. We have been working up to this meeting for quite a while, and this is a work session on the ordinance of Downtown Urban Renewal Plan Amendment. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Denny and his team to get us started.
So good afternoon. We're here again. This is a continuation of several discussions we've had on downtown improvements and funding options for those improvements, and we've looked at various funding options for four specific downtown improvement projects that you have identified. And today we're going to shift the conversation back to the potential urban renewal plan amendment and the plan amendment process that has been initiated. The amendment process requires various layers of outreach, concurrence, and the public hearing that we had on this Monday evening. Amanda's just done an amazing job of leading us through that effort, so I'm going to hand it over to her with kind of provide a quick overview of kind of what we've heard and what we've done as part of that public process. And then we'll try to focus in on what needs to happen if you want to keep the plan amendment process moving forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda.
So in March, you started the Downtown Urban Renewal Plan Amendment process, which was necessary in order to keep urban renewal as a funding option for the four downtown improvement projects that you identified. Part of that process, as Denny explained, is getting comment, and I'll go over that now. I'll provide a quick recap of where we've been and the proposed amendment, a summary of the comments we received, and you'll have the rest of the work session for your discussion. In December, you requested a work session on fiber and park blocks and funding options. You met 4 more times and discussed funding options. You added the Lane Community College former Downtown Center project and requested 2 funding strategies, downtown urban renewal and an alternative to downtown urban renewal. In March, you started the amendment process and requested individual work sessions on the 4 projects, and those have occurred. Monday, you held a public hearing. So let's review the main features of the proposed plan amendment. The 3 main aspects of the amendment are the decisions that you would need to make if you want to move forward with the amendment. The first is to pick the projects, which makes them eligible for you to use urban renewal on. Second, you set the spending limit that you'd want to work within. The third aspect of the plan amendment is the boundary to incorporate the East Park Block area and the City Hall block. The area is about 7 acres. This would allow the agency board to spend dollars for the East Park Block, the Willamette to Willamette initiative, and the City Hall Plaza, and it would be a backup location for the farmers market. You could also choose to expand the boundary to some smaller portion of either or both of those areas, and some options are at your places. Moving to the comments, we solicited comments from 3 main groups: taxing districts, planning commission, and the public. I'll start with the schools. Last week, School District 4J voted to concur with the proposed plan amendment to increase maximum indebtedness by up to $48 million. We received no comment from Lane ESD. As you heard from the LCC board chair at the public hearing, the board of directors voted to support the proposed projects for inclusion in the plan amendment and the use of tax increment financing as the funding mechanism. Yesterday, Lane County Board of County Commissioners approved a letter of support for the amendment, which is at your places. On May 9th, the Planning Commission verified that the amendment is consistent with city planning policies. They also emphasized support for the boundary expansion to include connecting the district to the Riverfront District along 8th Avenue so that urban renewal funds can be used to make improvements as part of the Willamette to Willamette initiative. Several commissioners provided additional comments: concern over the perception that funds could be used for City Hall, concerns that projects are too broadly defined, and encouragement to explain the process for refining and deciding specific spending, which I'll review in a minute. As part of the plan amendment process, we sent a public notice to property owners in the middle of April. On Monday, you held a public hearing and 60 people spoke. We compiled all of the written comments received as of May 18th. Those were in your packet in Attachment C, and a hard copy is in the council office. Comments received between Thursday and the public hearing were at your places for the public hearing, and comments received since then are at your places now. In addition to individual community members, specific entities provided written comments. Those included the League of Women Voters of Lane County, Lane Transit District, Downtown Neighborhood Association, Downtown Eugene, Inc., Travel Lane County, the Expenditure Review Panel, the Downtown Eugene Merchants, and then other entities spoke at the public hearing. So far, sorry, I thought the microphone was acting up again. So far, we received comments, 80 written comments. Themes of support included continued momentum downtown and an understanding of the community benefit to come from the project, with opportunities. Okay, so themes of support included continued momentum downtown and an understanding of the community benefit to come from the projects, with opportunities for more jobs and enhanced social well-being. Some who supported the projects also raised concerns over the proposed amendment. Two main themes of concerns have emerged that I'll touch on. The first is the theme that the projects are too broad or not defined enough at this point. We heard this from some planning commissioners and counselors, the League of Women Voters of Lane County, and several community members. This proposed amendment is more like the Riverfront Urban Renewal Plan. It's set up to make the projects eligible for urban renewal funds, with the expectation that council, as the agency board, would make decisions about project options and funding when more details are in hand. Briefly, let's look at that process. So if you decide to amend the plan, you would make whatever projects are in the plan eligible for urban renewal funds. Then we would do public engagement and project scoping. You would review the results and options. Then you could decide not to implement, or you could move forward with the project. Then you would select funding sources, which could include urban renewal or not. And that would then go through the budget process, which includes public hearings. The second theme is about oversight and accountability. To review what's currently in place, it's similar to the oversight and processes for other city funds. With the 2010 amendment, Council added a community member review of spending, and that's done by the Expenditure Review Panel. Their FY15 report was in your packet last week. Another concept we've heard councilors mention is taking a more incremental approach. And I'll show you here what a $17 million spending increase could look like to help inform your conversation for today. You'd get fiber in the district, a medium farmers market project, public engagement for park blocks and open space, with funds potentially available for improvements to park blocks, Broadway Plaza, Willamette to Willamette along 8th Avenue, and Hope Plaza. Moderate participation with renovation of LCC's old building, and project delivery administration. Councilor Zelenka requested a matrix, which is at your places. It provides low, moderate, and high amounts for the projects. These are the estimates we used in March to give you a sense of scale and scope. It's also what we used to get to the total spending limits. You'll recall these are in the proposed amendment. That was A equals 17 million, B equals 25 million, and C equals 48 million. This is the total amount of new downtown urban renewal money that would be needed. We assume the use of additional sources for projects. For example, grant dollars would be used as much as possible for the fiber project. One note on the park blocks and open space project: implementation costs would be based on your decisions after we have engaged the community in a discussion about what improvements they want to see. Implementation could be focused on the park blocks only, or any other combination of open spaces that the community experiences within the district. Lastly, and most importantly, you're not limited to A, B, or C. Where you want to land on the spending limit is one of the key questions. And with that, I'll pass it to Glenn.
So if you would like to keep urban renewal as an option, what we are hoping for is that you would give tentative direction today on the 3 questions that are on the screen. First, what projects at the moment would you like to continue to keep in the plan? Second, what boundary changes, if any, would you like to have in the plan? And then third, what spending limit? Your packet contains the draft of the plan, the report, and the findings that go with it. It's about 200 pages long. So getting last-minute direction from you about significant changes within a couple of days of when you would want to take action would be difficult for us to do. And so that's why we're asking for the tentative direction. If you can do it, give it to us today. We can then make the changes to what's in your packet, bring that back to you on June 13th. You can certainly change it on June 13th and give us additional direction. But if we know which projects and if we know what boundary you want, at least you think you'll want, that will make it a lot easier to meet the deadline. And with that, we're just turning it back to council.
Before I turn it, call on George Brown and Mike and Alan. My question is, the way this is set up is what projects do you want to do using urban renewal? Right?
At least some of the direction we'd like today is what projects would you like to continue to have in the plan in order to be able to possibly use urban renewal for those projects.
So my only comment, and I have mentioned this to you all before, is there is, of course, the possibility to say these are projects we would like to do separate from how you would like to fund them.
Correct.
So I guess I'm concerned that you may have a difference of opinion or whatever on the tool, but that doesn't mean that you might not want to eventually get these things done one way or another. So how you sort of separate that in your conversation so that you don't, because people are watching to see if you're going to close the door on, let's use the farmer's market as an example. Do you want to do the farmer's market or not? And if that's something you want to do, what tool you use to do that is another question. So I just wanted to put that out there as being clear about whether you want to do these projects as opposed to what tool you want to use to finance the projects should you decide to do them. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I got Betty and Greg in the queue. Okay, well, I'll start with George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I don't think anybody on the council is against any one of these projects. I mean, I'd like to see the LCC building developed. The LCC can do that with an entrepreneurial developer. Sure, we want to, encourage the farmers market. The city doesn't have to use urban renewal to do that. We don't have to use urban renewal to do any of these projects. So I think it's kind of we're starting off on the wrong foot. The reason we're meeting today is to answer the question, do we want to terminate the district or do we want to use it for these projects? It's not, do we like the projects or not? Urban renewal was created in 1947 after World War II to address slum and blight conditions, infrastructure. Things had deteriorated. It was an all-out war effort on 2 fronts, and the country just didn't have time to fix up housing and roads and bridges. That's why it was created. It was mainly to address slum and blight conditions. I'd just like to read something here from Ted Wheeler, Mayor-elect of Portland. He did an interview in 2009 when he was Multnomah County Chair. I support urban development. I support job creation. I support the creation of urban renewal areas around truly blighted areas that would not be developed, but for the investment of tax increment financing in those areas. I'm fundamentally opposed to the improper use of tax increment financing. If you invested in an area that is not truly blighted, you're simply taking dollars away from a jurisdiction that would be providing important community services, whether it's education, basic health, or basic human services. My main concern has been that the county and the school districts have been asleep at the switch, and I would say in our case, City Council and Urban Renewal Board has been too. Because the City Council has had this powerful tool, tax increment financing, available to it with virtually no oversight, they have used it as an ATM for projects that are important to the City Council that aren't necessarily a top priority to the citizens of this community. And I think that's what's happened here, too. Tax increment financing is easy money, and it shouldn't be easy money. It should be the dollars of last resort. There are other ways you can fund projects, whether it's private sector investments, an enterprise zone, whether it's going out and finding private sector investors. I would add federal and state grants to that list. You should only use TIF in the case where it couldn't be done by other development except for those TIF dollars. So what about slum and blight? The legal definition of blight is wishy-washy, so that almost any neighborhood in this city could be described as blighted. We've seen that in the blight report. I'll need a second round to come back to follow this point.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't believe that our conversation at this table is as much about blight as it is about the next logical step in our redevelopment of downtown. I think over the last several years, this council's done an awful lot of work to leverage all tools that we had in order to make downtown stronger, better, more people live there, and more employment there. And I think this is the very next stage, and the timing is right, and the tools are available to do it. My question is about the dollar amounts in this matrix. I know this was a response to Councilor Zelenka's request, and that's great. And good job, by the way. But if we wanted to do a mix and match like this, say, for example, that's completely within the scope of the way you would do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, then because I believe, and maybe I'm wrong and this vote will fail, but I believe there's enough of us that would like to move forward with this, I'm going to make a motion so that we can have an actual discussion about the pieces. So I'm going to move that we do the work, we direct the manager to begin the process of updating the district with the fiber, with the mid-level choice of farmers market, the low choice for the park blocks, and the mid-level choice for LCC. And if I have a second, I'll speak to that for a couple of minutes here.
There's a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded.
That, from what I can see here, takes us to something like, if the project delivery administration stuff comes in midway in there as well, it comes about 21.7. Denny, does that look about?
I actually brought my calculator.
Excellent.
We'll figure it out. Keep going.
I think that if my math is right, that's something about where we are. That's a bigger number than I was comfortable with. I personally would have liked to seen us below that number, but I don't see another option available to us based on the work that's needing on the park blocks area, which is where I would have lowered that number, because I believe we could do some other things to enhance the park blocks. But I'm comfortable putting this forward and making the motion, because what we're doing is granting the authority. We're by no means saying this is the way it has to get paid for now. We can look for alternative ways to pay for it, but we at least keep this tool on the table as a potential way to do that. I hope we address our parks differently. I also hope we separate out the Broadway Plaza piece and have a different conversation about that. But I think this motion takes us forward and gets this at a range that we can talk about now. So I hope people can support your amendment.
I did verify your math, and it appears to be correct.
Thank you, sir.
What was the total?
21.7.
So just to clarify, and then we'll just go again, is that the prior queue was just for comments, this is the cue for the motion, and the cue for the motion now has Chris, Betty, Claire, and Alan in it. And George. And Greg. Okay. All right. Okay.
Mayor, can we ask staff to repeat the motion? I was writing notes.
Yes. Want to repeat the motion on the table?
Well, I think the motion was to direct the city manager to bring back on the 13th a package that would include a fiber at the mid-level. I'm saying mid-level because it's the same in both. I mean, the same price. The farmer's market at the moderate level, the park block and open space at the low level, the old LCC building at the moderate level, and the project delivery administration that goes with that, for a total of
21.7.
so somewhere in the 21 range, 21.7.
Thank you.
I also wanted to clarify, because you said you wanted to separate Broadway Plaza out and have a different conversation, and so I don't know whether that means you want it not included at all, but we can come back to that.
I will answer that just to say it would be my preference to do it, but that takes us down a whole other political path, a conversation I don't want to have today. I think we can authorize that and choose at a future time not to do it that way or not to include it if we so chose.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're in the discussion of the motion, and Chris, you're up.
Thank you. I appreciate trying to cut through, I guess, the red tape, so to speak, and try to get right to a motion. And I think that's really nice to do that. The only hesitation I would have is we've not talked about the merits of each one of these options. So we're going straight to picking options before we've had a chance to kind of compare the different merits. And it's possible that I might come up with exactly the same list you do. I mean, it looks like a reasonable list, but I don't know if that's the list I would come up with if we had a chance to talk about it. So I realize that this means we'll have longer conversation, but I'm more comfortable taking my time than I am going fast. So while I'm very appreciative of the effort to do it, I don't think I'll support it now, but I would say we may get to this list later on, and we will definitely have to vote on a list later on, but I'd like to have at least a little more conversation before we do that.
Betty?
Thank you. I will vote against the motion. I will vote against anything that extends the urban renewal district. But if we were discussing, as for a list of projects, aside from these four things, there may be many other projects that we might want to do downtown, and they should be considered on their merits and one at a time, and not just something rushed in order to get to pass urban renewal. My first choice would be to help the farmers market, but I hope to do that some other way. Thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. I appreciate the motion. At this point, I'm inclined to support it. I do have some questions, but I can wait for a different round for that. So I definitely think the fiber project is a priority and it has a sense of urgency around it. I think we need to continue our commitment to the farmers market, and I'd be comfortable with the moderate level of support. I think other entities need to join in that effort. I'd be fine with the park blocks at a low level. I've been weighing whether or not I wanted to include them in this or not, since they are technically a park. Obviously, they're downtown, but I could see us looking for other sources to do some of that work. And then I believe that the LCC project is a very beneficial project for downtown. I think the partnership we had with LCC on their downtown campus has been a huge success, and while it in and of itself doesn't increase property value for that site because it's a public building, the activity generated downtown by that project has been very significant, and I think renovating their current empty space or being a part of a partnership in doing that would be an appropriate role for us. And I, still after the debate and the public hearing, I remain convinced that the urban renewal district is the most rational way for us to make these investments. I was impressed by the outpouring of public support for them, and particularly having the support of 4J and the Lane County Commissioners is important to me. And I really think that the council in 2010 use the urban renewal district very strategically to make investments that paid off far beyond what I think any of the folks on the council at the time might have imagined. And so I just can't see how that can be characterized as a failure in use of using the district. And I find that any other approach we might take would likely mean asking all of the voters to raise their taxes. And at this point, I think we have a viable tool. It's proven to be effective when we use it strategically. And so at this point, I would support the motion.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks for the matrix. This is very helpful to me, and it's well done. And in fact, it was to mix and match just as Mike's done. I thought it worked its purpose. I think we need to be clear about support for projects and the funding mechanism. Those two things to me are fundamentally different, and they're not necessarily linked together, although I understand why people want to do that. At the public hearing, we heard lots of support for the projects, which is great that people are jazzed by these things in some form or level of them. Few comments actually about the actual tax increment financing part as the funding mechanism, mostly about I like these projects. Let's move forward. And I agree that we've done a good job downtown. We've got a lot of things going on, and there's been great momentum, and that we should keep going with downtown and capitalize on the momentum. All that I agree with too. But I think there's a fallacy embedded in this that termination of the urban renewal district means termination of the projects, and that's not correct. Because there are other ways to fund every single one of these projects. So taking not doing them through tax increment financing doesn't mean the projects go away, nor does it diminish support for the projects. For instance, I like some of these projects a lot. So there's a question I had. So if we were to take a little slightly different approach than Mike is suggesting, which is can we have a even more scaled down version of the urban renewal district that says let's do high-speed fiber and high-speed fiber, and then as these other ones become more fully baked and more detailed and more fleshed out, then we can add them into it. And what does that process look like? That's an ordinance every single time?
Correct.
Which is not inappropriate to do, but just and instead what we're doing is kind of taking a carte blanche and figuring out the details later.
Right, and so it would be basically the same process that we went through this time, with the possible exception that we may not need to mail individual notice to everybody in the city, assuming that all you're doing is adding projects and you're not expanding the boundary. But at a minimum, we would need to notify the overlapping taxing districts, go through that process, planning commission recommendation, hearing from the other overlapping taxing bodies, public hearing, ordinance.
I noticed you didn't have anything about the boundary in there, and that was on purpose? Or is that a separate motion?
I wanted, actually, as Chris had mentioned it, I kind of wanted to hear more of the discussion too, but I didn't want it to be entirely free.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate that.
I wanted to see it focused a little.
Right, and I didn't. So is Broadway Plaza in or out? It's out for now.
I would prefer it was out, but I left it in the motion.
Oh, you did in the motion.
I think it'd be helpful. I'd feel a lot better if I could just clarify the park blocks open space category, because when I'm hearing you talk about it, you're talking about the park blocks, and this category, as we've presented it to you, has been really inclusive of all of the open spaces. So park blocks, Broadway Plaza, the Holt Plaza, the Willamette to Willamette connection. It was meant, as we've discussed it, has been to enable any of those to be eligible. As you know, we've engaged Project for Public Places. They're actually in town today, and we're going to do some pretty significant outreach around all of our downtown public places, regardless of whether this plan amendment goes forward or not. So it was meant to make it allowable, but we would have your future discussion. We could put any other kind of certainties that we wouldn't just move forward with one of those without talking to you. So I just wanted to put that forward.
Yeah, and the process laid out in one of the slides is put them all in and then discuss it,
Yeah.
fill them out later, and then decide whether you want to do them. So it enables them to be there. which I don't really want to go, I would rather not do it that way. But also fundamentally, the primary question is whether we use this tool, Texamic financing, in the urban renewal district versus some other funding mechanisms. So I was wondering if, as a friendly amendment, you would separate the two things in the motion and have two motions separate out the urban renewal district from the support for the project. So a motion, and so that would be a motion to have the projects be a separate one and the urban renewal approval in another.
Point of process, Mayor, this is a work session, so it's not quite at the same rules. May I answer him rather than just a yes or no?
Actually, we're not supposed to do that,
Well,
but when you ask for a friendly, you can always answer that request.
Okay. I would say no, but only in that I would turn the thing the other way around, the conversation the other way around, and say, it's also true that just because we begin to approve this as a potential way to fund it doesn't mean that at the end of the day when we do the project we have to use urban renewal funds in order to do it that way. And that would be my preference. If there is other monies available, we should use it and not use the complete capacity we've authorized. It's just as easily to do it that way.
So I'll move to amend to separate the motion into two parts.
Is there a second?
Second?
So I'm not quite sure of what the second motion would be, because as I understand Mike's motion, it's directing us to come back with a revised draft urban renewal plan that contains these 4 projects. If you're separating out the projects from what we're supposed to do with a revised urban renewal plan, I don't know what we're doing with the revised urban renewal plan. What I understand your intent to be, Alan, is to have a motion that says the council supports moving forward with these 4 projects with a funding mechanism to be decided at a later time, so you could vote on the project, to vote on council intent related to support for the projects and vote separately on urban renewal.
Correct.
But if that's what you're really doing, in my mind, what you're really doing is not separating Mike's motion into two.
You're substituting.
You're either substituting or you're really just adding a separate motion to say, can we just have a vote on, does council support these 4 projects separately from voting on whether to use urban renewal as the tool? So that's not really a motion to separate. It would, well, you're right, Mayor, it would be a motion to substitute a different motion, and then you'd be coming back to Mike's motion if somebody else made it again.
Can I speak to the motion?
I was asking for clarification, Mayor, and so he has a motion and there's a second, so we just need to understand what the intent of this is.
Yeah, the two things are, I think the outcome is the same. How you propose to get there is slightly different. My thought was that the 2 motions would be sequential. First, you talk about the projects and determine what you wanted to do, then talk about the funding mechanism. So I was thinking that the 2 would be in sequence.
So if you go to a substitute motion right now, then you substitute that one that you want to have first.
And the motion would be, let's talk about the projects and the level of funding and get approval for that with the funding mechanism determined at a different time. Is that what you're suggesting? Is
right. Your substitute would be
subsequent time.
I think, to move to express council support for these 4 projects at this funding level or different funding level, period. And then the council would debate that, vote on that, and then Mike could remake his motion, somebody else could make a motion, but your motion would be a substitute, and then Mike's motion would be off the table until somebody made it again.
Is that okay with the second, George?
You have to
I need to know
withdraw-
what, I guess I need to know what the
withdraw your other
motion
one.
is. Let's hear what the motion is again.
I think what you have
It's
to do is
not
withdraw
actually-
your former motion.
And make another one?
Yes, substitute
Okay,
motion.
I'll withdraw that motion and then move to substitute what Glenn said.
Can I get in the queue for that, Mayor?
As soon as we give it a second.
I believe Alan's motion is to substitute for the prior motion, council expressing an intent to support the 4 projects laid out on the matrix at the levels, well, at the moderate for fiber, the moderate for farmers market, the low for park blocks, and the moderate for old LCC building with the actual funding mechanisms not determined as part of the motion.
That's
Your motion?
second.
Yes.
And you
Thank
second that? Okay, and then,
I said that very well, didn't I?
yeah, you did. And then Mike and then George.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I hope that my colleagues won't support the substitution. I understand the value of having the conversation about each of these individual projects and then talking about the mechanism, but that's not really the effect of that motion. The effect of that motion is to begin to remove some of these projects from that list. That would actually be the more direct approach, as the whole point of the work session and the point of what we're talking about and the point of all the information is the first question: shall we or shall we not renew the urban renewal district? That's question number one, in the appropriate order that staff has presented it. The question number two is by how much or not. And so I think the better amendment or the better substitution would be, well, I agree that we should at least have the capacity to use urban renewal on these projects, but maybe not this one, because there's a better way to fund that. I would have accepted that friendly, because I believe that would have been, if you had a specific one you don't want to see done with urban renewal, maybe I might agree with you. I don't know. For me, back in December, the only reason I made the motion in the first place was because, for me, fiber is the piece that's most important to me. And where the council majority's comfort level is in moving forward, that one for me is central. And I go with the majority of where they are in each of these projects. My motion was to try to guess, if you will, where I thought a majority of people would be okay with it. But I don't want to, having spent this time, start at the beginning again and then hope we get in some free-form way to a list. So I hope we don't substitute.
George and Betty and Chris and Alan in the queue, and this is on the substitute motion, which is another list than the one for the original motion,
So
okay?
just to be clear, Mayor, this is on whether to substitute the motion.
Right.
So the council is now discussing whether to have Alan's motion or Mike's motion.
But the one that he's asked for the substitute, and they're voting yes, they will vote yes or no on him wanting to substitute the motion.
Right. If the council votes yes,
Then
then you have Alan's motion on the table
Right.
and you debate the merits of Alan's motion.
Right.
Right now, the question is, do you want to debate Alan's motion or do you want to debate Mike's motion?
Thank you for the clarification. George?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm certainly going to support this motion. Let's think back to December. Councilor Clark first raised the notion of amending the urban renewal plan to facilitate the expansion of fiber downtown. That's what kicked this whole thing off. Then things started being thrown in. LCC building, adding the city hall site to the boundary. Park blocks improvements. It's. Let's go back to the fundamental thing. I think we all support all of these. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the fiber. It's already been shown that the fiber project can happen after the urban renewal district terminates. We don't need it to do that project. If that's the most important project, actually, I think of all the ones, that probably is the most important. And by the way, have the grant applications been submitted to the federal government and to the state?
We are working with LCOG to write the EDA grant application. It's in process. And the state grant, we've submitted the supplemental, which has to precede the actual grant. You have to go through the first step, so that is pending. We should hear from them any day.
Okay, great. So, see, the fiber project can be done. And even if we don't get the grants, it can be done. I didn't bring it today, but you all have copies of a plan how that can be funded with a full faith and credit bond, telecom funds, and so on. We don't need the urban renewal district. We don't need TIF funds to complete that project. So let's just think back. That started the whole thing off, and now it's turned into this complex thing. We get the matrix. I suppose that was a good idea, but we get it. It's sitting in our desk. We don't have any time to study it and look at it and cross-reference and make sense and see if we, want to use it. So I think it's a real mistake to try to come up with specific amendments with dollar amounts and levels of support and so on today. So that's why I'm going to support Alan's motion. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. I will support Alan's motion just because I prefer it to the other one. But I do not like saying that I don't approve of all 4 of these projects at once. Maybe they're all good things. Maybe there are other things that would be equally good or better. And I think we're doing this just because in an effort to continue urban renewal. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying we like these 4 things and we'll vote for all of them now. I have trouble with that, but I will vote for the ability to substitute it. Thank you.
Chris?
Thank you. Actually, the conversations around both motions have done a lot to help clarify my thinking and kind of where I am, what I had mentioned earlier. And I think now that I've had a chance to kind of digest and hear what folks have said, I won't support the substitute motion because I think we do want to try to create more of a sense of clarity around both things. If we were going back, if the motion fails and we're back to Mike's original motion, is it possible, if that motion were to pass, at points along the way to amend the project list in some way to either make additions or subtractions or alter it? Or is because the motion passes, that becomes the list without any sort of opportunity to amend?
You could amend if you had time yet today. You could certainly amend when we bring it back to you on June 13th by giving us direction on which categories to include. We can get the plan in a shape where if you say, okay, we want to exclude this particular project from that category, you could give us that direction on the 13th, and that would be very easy to then incorporate. Okay. So this isn't a final decision. This is just a tentative decision so we know how to revise the draft to bring you something back closer to what might be final at your June 13th meeting, and then you can give us additional direction at that point.
Okay. And I'm not trying to telegraph that I have any major amendments or changes that I would want to make. This list looks pretty good. Anything that I might want to offer would be definitely in the form of a small tweak. So after having listened and thought about it, I won't vote for the substitute motion, but now I'm actually in favor of voting for Mike's original motion.
Alan?
Yeah, my thought process was what is the first question, and the second question is how, and that's why I posed it this way. And for instance, the park blocks, open space box, I, for instance, don't think we should put Broadway Plaza in this right now. And as Chris has said, there's not enough detail for us to actually be talking about these at the level that we need to be talking about them yet in order to put them forward. And also on the parks and open space box, 8.2 million just seems like a really big number for what we're trying to do there in relation to the other things that are on this list. So that seems too high. So my thought was, let's figure out what we want to do first and then how. But I can see if this fails, Mike, I hope you will make an amendment to what you said before, which is break out your motion up into 2 parts. And let's put to bed the question of whether or not we're going to do urban renewal or not, vote on that, and then and amend it, and then go on to the conversation about what the specific project should be, and vote, and then massage that to a point where we're all comfortable with it, or the majority is anyway.
So in the first round of Alan's motion, anybody else want to be in that? Not
Sorry.
Anybody else? Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I would respond and say, kinda, to Alan. My understanding of the nature of what we're voting.
Great one.
My understanding of the nature of what we're voting on is to direct the manager to come back to us with the necessary ordinance to extend this particular type of financing tool, because the time pressure was the thing that drove whether or not we should be doing it and when we should be doing it. The only thing, and this is the part where perhaps I can be corrected, the only thing that is of end of the day final consequence is what the number is that is attached to the authority for how much money may be spent. We're looking at a grid here that says these are, generally speaking, the sorts of things we'd like to see it spent on, but the specifics are up to the manager, and what we're giving the manager is, with the final passage of ordinance, is authority to do that. Do I have that right?
Let me rephrase.
Thank you.
Because I'm not sure that you do.
Right?
The plan has to include, for what we're talking about, two components.
Okay.
It has to say what's the maximum amount that can be spent.
Correct.
It also has to say what are the types, categories of projects
Right.
that the money can be spent on.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be super specific, but it has to be the money can be spent on, for example, a farmer's market.
Forgive my interruption just for a moment. The key word in what you just said, at least for me, is can or may. The money may be used for that, but it does not necessarily have to be. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, what I was going to suggest, given some of the conversation about sort of the ambiguities here, the vagueness, is you can build into the plan a process so that everybody is comfortable, and you can choose what the process is, but you could say, for example, that the city manager cannot spend any money on developing, constructing any of these projects.
If I could, we could do that on the 13th, right?
You could also do it today.
I think that's going to overcomplicate our conversation today. I'd like to do it on the 13th after we digest a little bit and perhaps get a little bit more help with staff. But the ultimate point of what I was asking you is, all we're doing today is saying, generally, come back to us so we can further refine with the specifics the authority to continue on with the district for these general ideas. And we may, on the 13th or at a future point or at another meeting, say, but we want this part off, or we'd like it with these conditions, or before we get to final approval. Is that
now
correct?
I think I understand your question. Yes, before you get to final approval. I thought you were talking over the next couple of years.
So the reason for my motion in the first place was to say, this is the broad outline of what we should move forward with and how. And yes, that even for me, there are pieces I would like to alter, but I think those are minor tweaks that we have the time to do, that we can do after public hearing, after the pieces of creating the ordinance are complete. But this is general direction today for the manager. Thank you.
So Alan's motion to me means, I think, pretty much what you said, that these are 4 categories that we're interested in pursuing. Not the funding mechanism, but these are 4 areas of projects that we as a council are interested in pursuing. That's what his motion means, right?
Correct.
All right. And so if we have a tie on that, I will support that, so that we have clarity on the projects that we want to pursue, whatever funding mechanism that the council decides on.
And again, to be clear, the motion on the table
I got
is the substitution, not the merits.
Yes, I got it.
Right.
Alan?
The other part of this that's not on the table, which is the question of whether or not the council would refer this to the voters in November. We still need to have that conversation. The second part of that is, and this question for Glenn, if we put this forward and didn't refer it to the voters, is this something that the citizens can petition to refer it?
Yes. They'll have 30 days from the time the mayor approves signs the ordinance to collect signatures to refer it.
They'll only 30 days to collect signatures?
Right. A referendum, you only have 30 days. Initiative, you have longer process. But because the ordinance will go into effect 30 days after adopted unless signatures are collected to refer it.
Right. Yeah, I understood that before. So the concern that I have is that moving this forward with vague notions of what these are, with these large price tags on them, is what then becomes the thing that would get referred. And then all the discussion about the merits of the projects and the specificity that you have goes out the window. It just becomes a conversation about this big dollar number and the urban renewal district, and it won't be about the projects. So I really think it's important for us to get a good, solid list of the projects first, and then figure out how to fund them.
So I want to, I've got George Brown, and Mike's got his hand up again, but I want to say that this is just one of a series of votes, and you are now at 12:50. So just putting that out to all of you. And you haven't had a turn, Greg, so go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. As far as this particular substitute amendment is concerned, I'm going to vote no on it, but I want to make perfectly clear here that I agree with Alan in terms of the fuzzy nature of particularly the park blocks and open spaces. And I feel that, there are other funding mechanisms that we can use once we've completed the Parks Master Plan study to include some sort of, piece of this in a broader bond measure. But I do have a point of clarification for staff on this. Now, are the park blocks and Broadway Plaza considered park lands? I remember that we had a discussion several years ago, specifically around Broadway Plaza, as to whether or not that should be designated parkland, and if the park blocks are or not. What specific land use designation are they under now?
The Broadway Plaza is not a park. The park blocks are considered a park. So park rules apply to the park blocks. The park rules do not apply to Broadway Plaza.
Okay. So we have split those out. So if we were to do something with the park blocks, conceivably that could be part of a larger park bond that would, address some of the bigger park issues that we have throughout the community. Correct? Okay. I've got my question answered.
Let's be really quick here. I've got George and then Mike.
So I just have a couple of questions for the attorney. When is the last day to amend the current plan?
If you are going to adopt it without the voter referral, then June 22nd, I think, is the final day you could do it, and still, if it gets a referral by the electors, be on the November ballot. If you are going to add to the ordinance your referral so that it's automatically on the ballot, then, and I don't remember the exact date, but you have until mid to latter part of July. Okay. And it could still be on the November ballot.
Okay. And what was the first date, I'm sorry, for making the voters go out and gather signatures?
June 22nd, I believe, is the last day you could act. That fits your calendar.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike.
I agree with Greg and his park comments. I also agree with Alan, and if Alan's motion does not pass, I'm perfectly willing to accept a friendly amendment that would direct the manager to come back to us and prior to voting on adopting the ordinance to extend the district, have a much more detailed, specific conversation about each of the projects one at a time, as we have already done, but in this opportunity saying these are the pieces we want in or out and put it to a vote so that we're very clear and specific. But where we are today is to begin the process of extending the district.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Alan's motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3. In opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It does not pass. We are back to the original motion. And in that queue are Alan is next, then George, then Greg, then George, then Mike.
Oh, pass.
You're going to pass. And I've got you, Claire. Thank you. Okay, so George, polling.
Oh, okay. Just getting a little confused. I forgot Mike's original motion.
The first thing you know.
Yeah. I am willing to support Mike's motion. I think that going through these, I think he's pretty much hit the level of the low, medium, and high levels at the right place. I do think that the Broadway Plaza is a completely different conversation that we need to have, but for the time being, I'm okay to go with Mike's motion. It's interesting. There was discussion about the the measure that went out in '07 with the Urban Renewal District and how it got beat 2-1. We need to remember that that was a large project where the profit was going to go into two developers' back pockets. That is not the case. The case what we're talking about now are basically 4 projects that's going to benefit the entire public. My vote in 2010, David Kelly, former counselor, once said, we're politicians, and one thing that politicians do is we change our minds. My vote in 2010 was based on the information I had at the time. Things have changed. I look at that vote at this point as a mistake. I look at a vote to move forward with the extending the Urban Renewal District as an investment in our future. The public testimony the other night was really inspiring to see all the young professionals that came forward, talked eloquently about the projects, about the funding mechanisms. They were prepared, they were educated on it, they knew what they were talking about, and at some point in my career here, I'm going to quit the council. Not now, but at some point. No offense, Betty, but I want to be 90 years old and still be on the council. But I'm confident with what I saw Monday night that the City of Eugene's future is in good hands. I do have one question. The money that has been designated for these projects, what if a project, say the park blocks or the fiber comes in at, say, $2 million instead of $3 million? We're just authorizing, if this passes, up to that amount. It doesn't have to be spent. Is that correct?
Correct. The council, acting as the agency board, will have to approve these expenditures. You'll have to budget the money. Nothing requires that you spend the maximum indebtedness amount of $21.7 million.
But we can't spend more than what's designated in here.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And one last thing, I think it's really interesting that in the 07 discussion, or the 2010 discussion, the county raised some concerns about us extending the Urban Renewal District. The school districts did too. And at this point, we've got unanimous support from LCC, from 4J, from the Board of Commissioners, as well as the Expenditure Review Panel, saying the Urban Renewal District did what it was going to do, and there was no major concerns raised by the monies that were spent. So I'm prepared to move this forward.
Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm prepared to move it forward with one exception, and I'm hoping that my friend, Councilor Clark, will accept a friendly here, and that is that I would like to delete the park blocks out of this. I think that, the park blocks is more appropriately funded, as we've had clarification on this, through probably a park bond measure. And I think that we should make sure that we have a narrow, very clarified scope of what we are going to use potentially this urban renewal extension money for. And my support would be for the moderate level for the fiber, moderate level for the farmers market, and moderate level for the old LCC building. And I think that gives much more clarity to, our intent in terms of what we're going to do. And as far as I'm concerned, right now I think that the parks idea is more or less half-baked. And I'd like to see more clarity around that, more specificity. And I don't want to move forward with that in the package. But I'll go with the majority. But I'm offering this as a friendly amendment, Glenn, if you can help wordsmith me on this, and then go from there.
Before you do that, I was just going to clarify. Want to really clarify that there's more to this than the park.
So and I don't want to be redundant, I just want to be clear so you know what you're voting on. The park blocks and open space section here that has the 8.2, when we did, I think, the previous work session, and Will went through specifics, $3 million of that was really associated with the park blocks, the 2 blocks. The rest was associated with improvements and investments in the Willamette to Willamette connection, which is downtown to the river, the Holt Plaza, Broadway Plaza, other open spaces. So when you vote on this, are you saying you don't want to have any capacity in this project mix to fund any of those outdoor spaces? And if that's the case, that would be the right way to do it. I just wanted to make sure you understood that.
So,
The first part was $3 million?
was it
The
three?
park blocks, the part we anticipated investing in the park blocks, which would have included some, amenities, a restroom potentially, some of those were in that $3 million package.
So, if it goes to the $3 million package, instead of 8.2, I think I could wrap my head around that.
So, Sarah, so I can be clear, $3 million was for the park blocks, $5.2 million would be for the other?
That's correct. So you reduce
Friendly accepted?
from 8.2 to 5.2.
Do we have to vote on that? Like,
No.
vote on an amendment to a motion?
He's taking it as a friendly.
It's a friendly.
I
I accept
friendly
that as a
amendment.
friendly. How about this?
Yeah.
So
3.2.
So before you accept it, I want to make sure I understand what the amendment would be. What I understand you saying, Greg, is you do not want the park blocks to be included as part of the urban renewal plan, and you want the amount to be reduced by the $3 million that was sort of estimated. Well, that's why I'm asking this question. I want to make sure.
Yeah, and what I'm looking at is to have the amount reduced to 3.2 million. That would be inclusive of
5.2. The other parts.
the other parts of the park blocks proposal here.
Not the park blocks,
But the downtown, the Willamette Way kind of.
Right, now, so those parts
those pieces of it.
totaled 5.2 of the 8.2 million.
But he's saying reduce it to 3.2.
Yeah, what we would reduce it down to that 5.2 million.
Okay, and I need to understand, because I'm not sure you guys are in agreement, do you want the urban renewal plan to say the money cannot be used for the park blocks? Or are you just reducing the 8.2 million down to 5.2?
It's reducing the 8.2 down to the 5.2 million, not.
So that's the only piece.
Yes, only piece there, yes.
Okay. So
you accept that as a friendly?
If what I just heard him say was you just want to change the number down to 5.2, I can accept that.
Yes. Yeah, I can live with that.
Okay, so that's the friendly.
And who seconded?
I did, and I'll accept.
Okay.
All right then, Mike, you're up.
I think we got the pieces there. I will actually, I suppose, I was willing to accept an amendment as a friendly that we should direct the manager to come back to us in specificity on some of these pieces prior to being presented with final approval, because I think there are some pieces we need further clarification on so that the voter isn't confused, as Alan suggested, and I think they would be if we're just approving broad spending authority. I think that would be unfortunate. We're doing this incrementally. Today, we're discussing and approving the spending authority legislation, the pieces that will come back to us to approve later. Tomorrow, or at a point before we give final approval, we will do work to be much more specific in the pieces that we expect to be funded with urban renewal or with potentially other options. I suppose I will make that. I don't know how to, Glenn, perhaps you could help me craft language for an appropriate motion on the fly here that would amend my initial motion.
So
in
Mike,
such
this seems a
fashion.
little, to me, on one hand, you're saying you want details on the projects, and on the other hand, in our earlier conversation, we said that they're not detailed, they will be worked out in more detail in the future and brought to council. So I don't know quite how that works out.
So there are a couple different ways you can proceed. One is between now and June 13th, June 15th, at the latest June 22nd, staff could have additional work sessions with you where you could say, okay, for the farmers market, here's some more specificity. For open spaces, here's some more specificity. Those kinds of changes, if we get them, let's say on June 13th, we can make those changes so that when you adopt the ordinance, those things can be in the plan. So that's one way you can proceed. Separate way that you can proceed if you don't want to put those details in the plan is you can build a process into the plan that says there's going to be more public involvement, there's going to be a public hearing before the agency board says we approve the expenditure of $1.3 million on this component.
I meant the latter for the reference.
Yeah.
I meant the latter in what you said. Do I need an amendment in order to do that?
Do it later.
No, we can just build that. We can draft language and include it, and you can look at it on June 13th.
Before
and
any
decide.
money is actually spent, we'll talk about the specifics. We're just granting the ceiling today,
We'll draft something into the
which will
plan
include
that you'll see
potential
on June 13th.
other ways to pay for it at the time. Thank you.
Okay, I've got George Brown, I've got Claire, I've got Alan, and I've got Betty.
Thank you. Okay, so look at the matrix of the low cost, I guess it is, under farmer's market, $1 million. That's what's moving forward with this motion, I believe. So that's for an open-air pavilion, and then I see underneath that land and demolition at no cost. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Are we thinking that the county's going to give us the butterfly lot?
I think in that scenario, it assumes we're talking about the butterfly lot, and that is granted for use for the farmer's market, yes, and the demo cost as well.
And then the county would tear it down at their cost, or, I mean,
In that
who's
scenario,
going to demo it for free? It says demo at no cost, but someone's got to pay for it.
it just means that it wouldn't come out of the urban renewal agency's part of the project. And I would just clarify.
Where would that come from? Public Works then, or City of Eugene, or, I mean,
The property could be delivered clear. I mean, it could be a county thing, and we haven't gotten that far down the road.
yeah, if you can get past the deed restriction, Mary Skinner's. Yeah, okay. Well, see, that's part of the problem with this whole thing. There is no specificity here. It's just a grab bag of ideas. I see that as a very big problem, and you can do that with almost every single one of these boxes. It's just so vague and so unformed, and it's got to be real specific, because if this goes to the ballot, people are not going to just approve a grab bag of ideas. Thank you.
Claire.
So a couple of things. I was hoping at some point to ask a couple of questions about the conversation around the boundary extension, because I'm not convinced about that, but it's not necessarily, I don't know if it's relevant to the motion on the table, so I'll hold off. But I will point out that in the open space totals, some of that, and from what I can tell, would include a boundary extension. So the Willamette to Willamette two-way traffic conversion, I think, would require a boundary extension if we wanted to fund that. Is that correct?
Yes, and if you want me to just quickly go over the options that are at the table, I could do that for you around the boundary.
I think it'd be helpful, because it seems to me the least vetted part of this whole conversation.
Okay, so what we've been taking out to the public has included the expansion that includes the East Park blocks. A lot of people have always assumed that's in there, but it's not. And we included an expansion around the City Hall block to get public comment on. And what we've heard from folks, including some of you, is that there's some concerns with maybe not all of the City Hall block, but part of it. So what we did was provide a couple of potential options here for you to think about. So the first one would be leaving it as is, how we've taken it out to the public. And all that does is put the boundary around it and say, this area is eligible. The second option is, actually, I'll jump to the third option. The third option is more of a recognition of a lot of positive comments about the Willamette to Willamette connection. And so in this one, we kept in the East Park block area and just kept the 8th Street right-of-way, plus I think it's about 10 feet on the other side, so that you could have a really important connection between downtown and the river, and just kept that in. And then the middle one really preserves some of the City Hall Plaza space, just a broader space along 8th Avenue and the east part of the block. And the reason why we did that was more to say, if you're concerned about this being used on City Hall, the building, the middle one would exclude that, but it still gives you a lot of flexibility on the east side of the park block, on the east side of the block, if For example, especially with the counties coming out with their new information, if their courthouse ends up on the butterfly lot, if it's some expansion into that area, do you want to have a space where potentially the farmer's market could still go in the downtown? And so it was really meant to keep it just on the table. And when I was thinking about it, I was looking at the downtown boundary as it is. The boundaries, we've barely used the tool on all of the tax lots. It's just a boundary, and then there's been very specific places we've infested it. So it doesn't mean that you would ever have to do anything in that site, but it would just leave it that option open and not have it, in some ways, put the county in also a difficult position as they face how they're going to make their decision about the courthouse.
And is this update our only opportunity to expand the boundary, or would we be able to do that at a later date?
You need to expand the boundary as this part of the amendment, because that's been a significant part of the public outreach and the legal requirements and all of the concurrence overlapping tax district information. A lot of that is very specific to the boundary.
Correct. Now, you would have the option a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, of going through exactly the same process you've just gone through and expand the boundary again, or expand the boundary for the first time. But if what you want to do is, as part of this process, getting some direction today would be helpful, so we could bring something back to you on the 13th that's closer to what you're thinking. If you can't do it today, we'll try to make it work if you give us that direction on the 13th.
So I'm not going to make a motion right now. I'm going to let the conversation continue, and maybe once we've settled Councillor Clark's motion, we can take up the boundary question. And on that, I'm not inclined to expand the boundary very far, if at all. I think the East Park blocks would be fine, although I hear another councillor doesn't think we should necessarily use urban renewal on them, and perhaps that 8th Avenue. But I'm still pondering that. I just want to point out on the park blocks piece, open space piece, my understanding is that there's still a lot of public engagement that we want to have around those open spaces, whether it's the park blocks, the Holt Center Plaza, and other places, open space downtown. So I'm hoping that we're not excluding the park blocks from that conversation, even if we used a small amount of this urban renewal funds for the engagement process and the visioning process, and then figured out later how to fund whatever it is the public asked us to create there. So that's, I can support the motion as amended, but still think there's some value in retaining some ability to do some of the improvements we may want on the park blocks, particularly something like a permanent restroom facility, because that can be a fairly large capital expense.
Alan.
Yeah, I realize the approval of the urban renewal district is going to happen. But I think it's a very, very big mistake for us not to be very, very clear about exactly what's in these projects. An open-ended, unclear project list is contrary to everything we've learned over the last couple of years about being modest in our scope and being specific. And that seems like the right way to go. That's exactly why the road bonds passed. We were very specific, we constrained it, and it was modest, and we were extremely specific about what would be in it and what would not be in it. So I am actually still unclear about what Greg did. Did it just eliminate $3 million and didn't change anything else?
That's correct.
Okay. And so then I have a question about the boundary, which I agree needs to be done. If the farmer's market's in and it's on the butterfly lot, that's outside this boundary, and that means we can't spend it on that?
No, it's in the
It's in the
existing.
boundary.
Yeah.
It's in the current boundary.
The butterfly lot?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I thought the butterfly lot was the box right above the
Actually,
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Where it
So
says,
that's actually, that's the.
where it says Downtown Urban Renewal District on that map.
You
that
are
is-
here.
It does say you are.
You are.
It just says district.
Where in the world is Alan
You're
Zelenka?
adjacent.
I just want to comment on Amanda's pin, which is a frog, right? I think very appropriate, because one of my all-time favorite things about how we move forward is wheelbarrowing frogs from one pond to another, and all the frogs are dumping out, and we're trying to keep them in, is kind of what we're doing on a regular basis. So I thought your pin was very appropriate.
So, Denny, you're up.
Thank you. There's a lot that the public doesn't know about urban renewal and about the administrative costs and all sorts of things, but I want us to be perfectly clear and honest about everything as we go along, as you go along, I should say. And you said that all the taxing districts have approved this, that would be affected have approved unanimously. I want to know, did every person on each of those bodies approve?
One clarification is the letter of support from the county was a 4-1 vote. It wasn't unanimous.
Okay, that's not unanimous then, right? And how about the others?
Those were unanimous. 7-0 and 6-0
From 4J.
for J and LCC.
4J Board and LCC were unanimous, and there was one dissent on the county. At least that is not totally unanimous, then, as you stated previously. Thank you.
Mike, and we'll vote.
Yeah.
George, okay.
I would say that by the time we get to a final vote on shall we extend the life of the urban renewal district, we will have what would more appropriately be defined as a very specific set of instructions to the manager about very specifically what will be spent on and what won't, and how in future, in the future, at the time the dollars are spent, the process by which we will go through the specific review. So this isn't an entirely one-to-one comparison to a bond, which is a different kind of, I'm sure Councilor Zelenka knows, is a very different manner of financing. So I would say it's really not accurate to compare these two and say that perhaps we're doing it differently this time and incorrectly. I'd reject that notion because of the fact that this motion contains very specifically how the staff will come back to us before any dollars are approved and have very specific instruction. And what we're giving today is very specific to the particular place, time, and location of what we want done, what kind of project, and where. Much like we're going to go do that street over there. Here's a list of streets, but we didn't say exactly how many feet. We didn't say exactly what pound of, asphalt was going to be put on. We just said that street over there. In a very similar way to what we're doing right now in the definition of these projects. So I hope it wouldn't get construed that way.
George Brown, last one.
I'd just like to point out that the 2010 amendment was very specific with the projects. The only one that wasn't finished was the $500,000 for the park blocks. Staff had 5.5 years to come up with a project and spend that money and go, and pay off the debt, actually. It never happened. So now here it is back here, although it's removed with Councilor Evans' amendment. The other projects here in park blocks, the open space, Willamette to Willamette, Alt Center, accessibility improvements, Public Works can pay for those. It's going to be harder because Council majority approved taking $2.1 million from the Public Works budget to fund an empty fourth floor at the new City Hall. Council majority approved that transfer of funds, which then weakens the ability to do anything along 8th Avenue. Therefore, we need urban renewal, but not really. We still don't. All these projects here can be funded without it. Finally, I'd just like to point out that there was one review body that was not unanimous in approving this plan, and that's the Planning Commission. That was 4-3. That was a very, very narrow vote, and so it's not a total chorus of boosters on this thing by any means. And personally, I think that the planning commissioners that voted against it are some of the most thoughtful ones on the commission. Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to vote on Mike's motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In opposition, 1, 2, 3. It passes. Thank you. Any further discussion of, yes?
So does staff need to have the boundary issues settled today before we move?
That would be
helpful.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to say yes before Glenn says we have more time.
I was going to say it would be very helpful, and so if somebody's going to make a motion, great. The direction that you had in your prior motion, because Willamette to Willamette is in there, is at a minimum on this option 3. In order to do Willamette,
C.
C.
With
right.
the addition of a "you are here" symbol.
Yes. Just for
Are
you.
you putting
Yeah,
on the show?
I'll move adopt option C
We did.
as a boundary
Second.
change.
Moved and seconded. Okay, further discussion?
Here.
All right, Greg and then Mike.
You know, I tend to support this motion. I would like to see us go a little bit larger. I'd like to go for option B because I'd like to see a little more flexibility in terms of where, you know, we could possibly locate the farmers market in case there's, you know, some land issues where they are at right now across the street, and give us an ability to, you know, because they're going to be growing. That's part of the purpose of them, you know, wanting to develop their footprint and their profile is because and we heard a lot of testimony from a lot of farmers that came in and other people who support the farmers market about having more room and more space to develop their, you know, the market and the things that they want to do on the market. So I would tend to look at extending the boundary to include a larger footprint.
Is that a motion?
Friendly?
I'm making that as a friendly, yes.
I was okay with A, but I didn't think that would fly.
Well, I could go for A too. I just thought that maybe I was just trying to creep a little bit.
So what are we doing?
So
Friendly for B, right?
it's a friend. I would prefer to go friendly A.
I'll accept that.
Okay.
I don't accept that.
I don't.
Okay. How about B?
B, I could live with
No.
B.
No?
Okay.
All right then.
So we're at C.
C.
All right.
All right,
Fine.
Mike.
Set files now to make another motion.
I would accept B under the following conditions, that be used for any potential thing that could be the farmer's market, could be based on what the legislature does next year, it could be the new courthouse if we're able to work with the county, but it would not ever be for any part of the City Hall project. And so if there was a way to virtually guarantee that that particular part of urban renewal would never be used for City Hall, I might be inclined to support B. Is there a legal way to do that?
We could put language into the plan that says the area that would be basically north of this line. We'd sort of take B and we would turn it into a hybrid where instead of all this being purple, part of the purple would be a different color, and say on the northern part of this, it could only be used for farmers market. I mean, we'd have to say what it could be, and we could put that language.
You could say you would have to say what it could be used for as opposed to what it could not be used for.
We can do it either way.
I'm asking about this as a potential friendly because I want to alleviate the fear that the public has that we'll somehow use this with the City Hall project. And I think I may be wrong that Councilor Surratt has a similar concern. I might be wrong about that. But I think that if we made just that simple caveat B might be an acceptable option.
We can do it either way, and that would be an easy enough thing for you to, if you didn't like the way it looked on the 13th, you could change it and you can flip it around. Now, just to be clear, that's what the plan would say. Somebody said, can we make it legally binding? It's legally binding unless the council changes the plan.
Right.
Thank you. I would prefer the limited option C. We already are sparking controversy by extending the zone at all. So reaching it out further, just exacerbates that dynamic. Although I appreciate the attempt to get some clarity around whether or not it could be used for City Hall. Right now, what we've heard from the Lane County Farmers Market is they are very committed to staying at their current location for many reasons, and for many years they have looked at what their options might be, and they keep coming back to, we want to stay where we are, and they really hope that this land swap idea can carry out. I know it's still a big question mark as to whether it will or not, but I feel that I need to defer to what their board of directors has told us quite clearly many, many times. So that's why I'm not willing right now to entertain the idea of extending this urban renewal district now, in the eventuality that maybe possibly sometime in the future there would be a farmer's market over on that High Street side of the block. I think that if we got to that point, where it was obvious that they weren't going to be able to expand at their current site, then we would need to take up that conversation at that time.
Alan?
Well, I think it's hard to change the boundary later. If we're going to do this, might as well do it now. So the difference in the bottom swath in C and B is a matter of width. Is that just graphical, or is that?
And you could adjust that. You could do B plus and make that larger swath narrower if you want. It was just recognizing that if you really wanted to have a broader, it was just making it open for a broader plaza street connection in case we did something really different along 8th Street. When that day comes to reconstruct the street, we were just trying to create a broader plaza area. But it could be shrunk back. We were just giving 3 potential options.
All right. I agree with what you said, Claire, but you should always have a plan B. And it's not clear to me that the butterfly lot is going to, and the land swap's going to occur, and that the county will let that go. That's all totally up in the air for me, and I think it still is. And a lot of decisions that need to fall into place, and potentially lawsuits. So I'm actually going to withdraw my motion and then make another motion to adopt B, with the caveat that none of this be used for the new City Hall project, and that my least favorite thing on the planet would be for that east block to turn into a parking lot. I think that would be a disaster if that ended up being a parking lot. So I'll add in that it not be used for City Hall nor a parking lot.
Second.
Moved and seconded. And George Brown, and then we'll vote.
Thank you. Well, I didn't even think that we needed C, and we certainly don't need D. The reason we don't need C, that's for Willamette to Willamette, that is a theoretical concept. That's not even a real thing. We're talking about one block of street. I mean, this is a matter for public works, not an urban renewal district, not tax increment financing. That is just absolutely ridiculous. Remember, I'm going to go back to what Ted Wheeler said. It's an ATM for projects that are important to the city council, but aren't necessarily a top priority to the citizens of this community. I will guarantee you that that is not a top priority for the citizens of Eugene, to extend the urban renewal district that one little finger there. And I don't think any of these are. There's absolutely no reason to pick A or B either. It doesn't, you're exactly right. I mean, so you say it won't be used for City Hall, but we've seen things fudge in the various urban renewal projects through the years. So I'm not going to support this motion. We shouldn't extend the boundary at all.
Thank you. I'm not going to support it either, but if we're going to have a slush fund, I don't know why you're so opposed to spending it for City Hall. That is an essential thing, and it could be used for that rather than some other funds being used for that. And I don't see the point of that at all. If it is a slush fund, it's easy to spend, it's easy to get, and it's easy to hide the extra expenses attached to it. But I see we're going to have urban renewal till George Polling is 90 years old at least.
In his sixth
You look at the numbers.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote on Alan's motion. All those in favor?
Which is B.
B, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, it passes. Anything else? Nope. Well, there's no time anyway. All right.
Exactly as it should have been today.